Hey guys, tonight we're headed somewhere lush, loud, and absolutely unpredictable. The kind of place where wild ivy grows on marble walls, where the wine never stops flowing, and where gods don't just appear in the sky, they stroll into town wearing perfume and a knowing smile. You're standing at the dusty gates of Thebes, an ancient city-state not known for being especially chill. The walls are high, the people cautious, and the king. Oh, he's not exactly the life of the party. But tonight, something's different. The air smells faintly of myrrh and fermentation, and you can hear distant drums, slow, rhythmic, like a heartbeat that's had one too many goblets of wine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you all tune in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the city just as something strange is starting to unfold. There's talk in the agora, a murmured story being passed around like gossip at a very polite dinner party. A stranger has arrived. He's not from Thebes. That much is obvious from his robes, which shimmer a little too much in the sun, and the ivy crown sitting jauntily atop his curls like a man who's either a priest, a fool, or both. You follow the rumors to the temple steps. There he is. Dionysus. He doesn't announce himself with thunder or flame. That's more of a Zeus thing. No, Dionysus just shows up. Quietly. Beautifully. Smiling like he knows a secret that you'll be dying to learn in about 5 minutes. His hands are soft and uncalloused, the kind of hands that have held goblets, not spears. But when he gestures, people listen. A soft word from him, and suddenly otherwise dignified matrons are dancing barefoot in the dust. Farmers drop their tools and start humming forgotten songs. Even the local theater troupe, usually underfunded and under-rehearsed, starts improvising scenes that feel strangely divine. You watch this unfold with that creeping sensation that maybe, just maybe, you've wandered into the beginning of something historic, or historically regrettable. The people of Thebes are divided. Some say he's a prophet. Others think he's a prankster. But Dionysus doesn't care what they think. He came for one reason, to be recognized. To be worshipped. And also, probably, to cause just a little chaos on the side. Now, here's your first boring but true historical nugget. Ancient Greeks really did have mystery cults surrounding Dionysus. These weren't just drunken weekenders. They had rites, rituals, secret handshakes. Okay, maybe not the last one, but still. Some ceremonies lasted for days, often held at night, in the hills, away from the city, where the rules blurred and identities melted, and the city of Thebes. It was ground zero for Dionysus's origin myth. This is where his mortal mother, Semele, was incinerated by Zeus's divine reveal, because, as we all know, nothing says, "I love you," like vaporizing your girlfriend. Historians still argue whether the cult of Dionysus began in Thrace, Asia Minor, or somewhere else entirely. But mythologically speaking, Thebes is where he returned to prove a point, and that point. If you deny a god, expect a very inconvenient visit. Pentheus, the king of Thebes at the time, is absolutely not amused. He considers Dionysus a threat. A wandering showman stirring up the womenfolk and disrespecting the social order. Never mind that half the city seems enchanted by this new visitor, the drums, the dancing, the sudden spike in imported wine sales. Pentheus sees it all as a problem. You, however, are curious. You stay back and observe. Dionysus speaks softly but carries the confidence of someone who's crashed 1,000 parties and never once been asked to leave. He tells stories about his travels, eastward, across lands where mortals welcomed him with song and grapes and the occasional musical animal. Yes, there are stories about dolphins, pirates, and wine turning into seawater. Standard myth stuff, but there's something more subtle in his tone. He's not just here to have fun. He's here to reclaim his name, his mother's honor, and maybe humble a few mortals in the process. And you start to notice strange things, children giggling at shadows that move on their own. vines growing overnight where there had been none. A statue of Hera inexplicably sweating, red, now, this could all be tricks of the mind, Theban heat, exhaustion, rumor. Or, just your average Tuesday in a polytheistic society, but still, something's brewing. Something wild. Something fermented, and you're standing right at the edge of it, sandals coated in dust, ears ringing with drumbeats, watching as Thebes prepares for either enlightenment, or a hangover that might last a generation. You decide to trail the newcomer, this stranger in linen robes and a crown of ivy who seems to hover rather than walk. He's not exactly hiding, but he isn't staying put either. One moment, he's speaking softly to a merchant whose olives have never ripened so sweetly. The next, he's standing at the edge of the city fountain, where children play, pouring a single drop of wine into the water, and somehow, that one drop is enough to tint the whole basin. No one asks questions. No one dares. Not aloud, anyway. His voice carries like silk in the breeze, gentle, warm, persuasive. And when he speaks, it's not in commands but invitations. The kind that don't feel like choices at all. Wouldn't you like to join us? He asks a weaver, whose fingers have never moved faster on her loom. Wouldn't you like to forget, just for a little while? The stranger doesn't say his name at first. But you know it. Everyone does. Dionysus. The god of wine, yes, but also of release, of theater, of masks, and of madness. He wears no armor. His weapon is a staff wrapped in ivy and tipped with a pinecone, the thyrsus. It looks like something a child might wave in a school pageant, but you wouldn't dare laugh. Because when he walks past, the air smells like wildflowers and storms. It crackles with potential, like something wonderful or terrible is about to begin, and you, of course, are standing far too close. You follow him down Theban alleyways and up toward the outer courtyards of the city. The crowd is growing. Not huge yet, just enough to feel like something's happening. A handful of women have begun to wear their hair loose, a quiet scandal. Some men murmur about joining the performance, but their wives are already gone. Gone where? That's what you intend to find out. Now here's your historical fact. In actual Greek religious life, Dionysian rites were deeply tied to theater. In Athens, festivals were devoted to dramatic performances in his honor, tragedy and comedy both. It was all about catharsis, about pushing emotion to its limits, then stepping back into the world changed, but in myth, his theater was wilder. The performance was life itself. The players didn't always know they were on stage until it was too late. You get close enough to hear him speaking now. He's telling a story about how he was captured by pirates once, Thracian sailors who thought he was just a fancy noble ripe for ransom. Poor choice. The moment they tried to bind him, their ropes slipped like butter. The sea foamed. The mast blossomed into grapevines. And one by one, the crew leapt into the sea, where they became dolphins. You can still see them, Dionysus says with a grin. Playful. Regretful. Very musical. A few listeners laugh nervously. One woman claps her hands like she's heard this before, maybe in a dream. You wonder, was any of it true? The pirates, the vines, the music under the waves. Historians still argue whether stories like these masked older rites, older beliefs imported from Eastern cults that predated even Olympian myth. Some scholars point to Dionysus's non-Greek roots, his name possibly linked to foreign deities of vegetation and resurrection. He was, in a sense, always an outsider. A god who didn't quite belong among the skybound seriousness of Olympus, and Thebes, with all its pride and stone and rules, is precisely the kind of place that would hate that. Pentheus certainly does. You catch a glimpse of the king at the edge of the crowd, his lips tight, arms crossed in the universal pose of men who are about to make very poor decisions. He's muttering something to his guards. His eyes never leave Dionysus, but Dionysus. He doesn't spare the king a glance. Not yet. Instead, he turns toward the people. Come, he says, in a voice that's somehow everywhere and nowhere. Let us honor the mother. Let us honor joy. And with that, he begins to walk, and people follow. This isn't a riot. It's not even a parade. It's a slow, surreal procession. Through the gates. Into the fields. Toward the forests that stretch beyond the city's edge. You're not quite sure why you're following. Only that you don't want to miss what happens next, and besides, this is still Thebes. You could always turn back. Right? At the city gates, a man with a wine stain on his toga leans on the wall and shouts, "We'll be back by morning." You won't. The forest looms like a breath held too long. But Dionysus enters it without fear, his thyrsus parting the undergrowth like it's greeting an old friend, and you? You step in after him. The woods outside Thebes are not quiet at night, they're a slow tangle of sound, crickets chirping like the tick of time, leaves rustling with the hush of secret footsteps, and drums. Always drums. Soft, steady, growing bolder as you push further in. You follow Dionysus deep into the hills, your sandals caked in dust and your sense of direction long gone. And yet, there's no fear in you. Just an odd, liquid warmth, like maybe the air itself has been drinking, and here, at last, comes the king, Pentheus, cloaked in authority and suspicion, flanked by guards who look equally grumpy and underpaid. His brow furrows like he's trying to knit two bad ideas into one even worse one. And he's about to do something very, very on brand. Confront a god. Now, before we go too hard on poor Pentheus, remember this, he wasn't entirely wrong to be suspicious. He's a king. His job is to keep order. And here comes Dionysus, all whispers and vines and liberated housewives, turning Thebes into a stage play no one auditioned for. Still, there's something personal about Pentheus' anger. He's not just annoyed. He's offended. Like a man watching someone dance too freely at a wedding. Historians still argue whether Pentheus represents the rigidity of patriarchy, the fear of chaos, or just your average ancient micromanager spiraling out of control. He orders the stranger arrested, you flinch as spears clatter and soldiers lunge, and Dionysus smiles, the ropes fall away from his wrists like they're embarrassed to be involved. The guards stagger back, suddenly unsure of why they came here or whether they remembered to feed their goats this morning. One swears he saw fire in the god's eyes. Another claims the god turned into a lion for half a heartbeat. You don't see a lion. You just see Dionysus, calmly adjusting his robe, looking bored and vaguely entertained. Like he's seen Is seen play out before, probably with better actors. Pentheus is not amused. He orders Dionysus imprisoned. A makeshift cell is prepared, thick wooden beams, iron bolts, and a stern warning not to try any god stuff. The moment Dionysus is locked in, a gentle tremor rolls through the palace. Nothing dramatic, just enough to knock over a vase and remind everyone that maybe building your jail out of olive wood and optimism wasn't the best call. Moments later, the prison is rubble, Dionysus is gone, and somewhere in the courtyard, a fake tree bursts into bloom. You start to realize something. Dionysus doesn't fight back the way other gods might. There are no thunderbolts. No plagues or floods. Just patience. Misdirection. And the slow, delicious unraveling of logic. This is a god who lets people tie their own knots, and then invites them to dance in them. The next morning, the city wakes to an absence. The women are gone. The fields are empty. Even the temple handmaidens have vanished, their ceremonial robes left in messy piles by the gates. At first, the men panic. Then, they grumble. Then, they begin to talk about how this is probably Dionysus's fault. Which, to be fair, it is, but not in the way they think. You see, Dionysus didn't force anyone. He invited them. And the invitation was accepted. Now, here's your quirky tidbit of the night. In real ancient Greek festivals, especially the Dionysia in Athens, women were often given special roles in rituals, and in rural versions of the cult, women would indeed travel into the countryside for nocturnal rites. Scholars still debate whether these events were spiritually liberating, socially transgressive, or just a really great excuse to avoid housework for a couple of days. Pentheus, of course, sees none of this nuance. To him, it's a rebellion. A challenge. And he responds as any tragically prideful figure would, by vowing to put an end to it. You hear him bark orders. Spies are sent to track the women. Messengers gallop out, only to return wide-eyed and sweating, babbling about women dancing with snakes, wine springing from tree trunks, and a bear that politely asked them to leave. Pentheus decides to go himself. To infiltrate, and here's the catch, Dionysus helps him do it. The god appears once more, as serene and elegant as ever, and suggests, with the gentlest smirk, that if the king really wants to see what's going on, he'll need to disguise himself. As a woman. You'd think that would be the line, but no. Pentheus, obsessed and entirely off the plot, agrees. Dionysus himself dresses the king. Adjusts his veil. Places ivy in his hair. Speaks softly of how to walk, how to carry oneself, how to move like someone the world does not watch with suspicion. You, standing off to the side, begin to wonder, is this still about control, or is it about curiosity? And for the first time, you sense that Dionysus is not just a god of wildness, but of reflection. Of transformation. Of seeing something unfamiliar in the mirror, and letting it change you. Pentheus ascends the palace steps in full disguise. The drums are louder now, the forest is calling again, and you, ever curious, follow. By the time you reach the forest again, the sun has sunk into a bed of dusky clouds, and twilight is doing its usual trick, making every tree look taller, every sound seem stranger, and every shadow just a little too interested in your ankles that you're not alone. Pentheus, dressed in flowing robes borrowed from a noblewoman's wardrobe, is wobbling slightly as he picks his way up the hillside. The sandals don't quite fit. The veil keeps slipping. And he keeps glancing at Dionysus, who walks beside him as though this were a completely normal outing between two very close, very differently dressed acquaintances. The king clears his throat and asks, perhaps too defensively, if he looks convincing. Dionysus tilts his head. You look radiant. You cough into your sleeve to hide the laugh. Now, for our mainstream historical fact, ancient Greek theater, also sacred to Dionysus, routinely featured men playing women's roles. Cross-dressing wasn't scandalous on stage, it was expected. But here, in myth, there's a layer of dramatic irony so rich you could bottle and sell it as olive oil, because Pentheus is no actor. He's a king. A symbol of law and order. And now, he's pretending to be exactly what he fears, one of the ecstatic women who abandoned their households to follow a god with a vine-covered stick. And Dionysus is simply delighted. As you make your way deeper into the woods, the atmosphere begins to shift. The trees are no longer silent sentinels, they hum. Really. There's a low vibration, as though the forest itself has tuned into some ancient frequency. You step carefully over roots and moss, following the sound of pipes, flutes, not plumbing, and laughter. Not the polite kind you hear at dinner parties, but real, unfiltered belly laughter. Mixed in with howls and the occasional goat bleat, you begin to smell grapes. Crushed, fermented, sun-warmed. And so, meatying floral, like honeysuckle dipped in honey and forgotten in a linen drawer, and then you see them, the maenads, women, dozens of them, maybe more. They're dancing in spirals, robes swirling, bare feet pressing into the earth like they belong to it. Hair loose, eyes wide, faces soft with joy or madness, it's hard to tell the difference. Some carry thyrsi like Dionysus, and others have snakes wrapped around their wrists like bracelets that move when no one's looking. You blink, are those snakes? Yes. Yes, they are. One woman kisses hers on the nose. Pentheus crouches behind a bush, peering through the leaves like a boy spying on a secret clubhouse. He whispers something, probably not appropriate for a king to say out loud, and adjusts his wig. Dionysus leans down beside him, smiling sweetly. You see now, he murmurs, why they left the city. The king frowns. They're possessed. Liberated, Dionysus corrects. Possessed, liberated, it depends on who's telling the story. Historians still debate whether Dionysian rites represented female empowerment in a male-dominated society or simply offered a sanctioned outlet for hysteria and rebellion. Either way, it's safe to say, these women are not planning to be home by supper. You watch as one woman, possibly a banker's wife, picks up a tambourine and spins herself into dizziness. Another kneels beside a spring that wasn't there moments ago and fills her cup with what definitely looks like wine. You reach for your own flask, just to check, still water, rude, then, something changes, the laughter stops. Heads turn. The music halts like a needle scratched off a record 2,000 years too early. They've seen him, not you. Him. Pentheus, the king, in his too bright robes and slipping veil, caught mid-curious crouch, trying to remember whether he was supposed to be walking with purpose or with mystery. One Maenad steps forward, eyes narrowed, another follows, Pentheus freezes. You, wisely, take a large step behind the nearest olive tree, the Maenads begin to murmur. They speak not to Pentheus, but to each other. Is she one of us? She moves like a stranger. She watches, but does not join. Dionysus, still smiling, says nothing. Pentheus stands. Tries to explain. Says he's here to learn. To appreciate. Maybe even, to participate. A third Maenad circles him slowly, her thyrsus tapping the ground with a rhythmic thump, and then, with a voice like velvet dipped in honey, one of them speaks, an intruder. Pentheus laughs nervously. Tries to back away, but it's too late now, because here's the thing about masks, they reveal just as much as they hide. And under the mask, under the borrowed robes and the trembling sandals, the women see what's really there, not a sister, not a seeker, a spy, a king, a man who tried to imprison their god. The frenzy builds again. You can feel it rise like heat from the forest floor. The drums return, faster this time. The flutes shriek. The tambourines tremble. The forest pulses, and Dionysus, he just steps back. This, after all, was never a trap. It was an invitation, and Pentheus, he RSVP'd. You don't want to see what happens next, you really don't, but your feet refuse to move. You're rooted, like one of those unfortunate mythic souls transformed into a tree for eavesdropping on divine business. Except you're just a witness. A very tired, slightly thirsty witness who now wishes they'd stayed home and studied ancient pottery shards instead. The Maenads descend on Pentheus not like attackers, but like dancers closing in on a soloist who missed their cue. There's no roar of rage, no battle cry, just movement, swift and certain. Hands that had moments ago cradled flutes and wine goblets now reach with the strange, serene force of fate. Pentheus cries out, not like a king, but like a man who suddenly realizes the rules of this game are very, very different. He calls for help. Dionysus, ever gentle, raises one hand. Help is what you needed before you put on that dress. A few Maenads hesitate, sniffing the air as if catching the scent of truth. One tilts her head. Another hums, a lullaby, almost. And then, the frenzy returns. Now, let's soften the details here. You're sleepy. You're safe. And this isn't a horror show, it's myth. A slow, symbolic unraveling of hubris in flowing robes and bad decisions. The women tear at the disguise first. The silk veil, the borrowed earrings, the delicate sandals. And then they see him for what he is. Not one of them. Not a follower of Dionysus. Not a believer. A pretender, and so, in the myth, they do what the Maenads do. They dismantle him. With their bare hands and unshakable faith, they unmake the king. Now here's your fringe historical tidbit. Some ancient vase paintings actually depict this very scene, Pentheus being torn apart by women in a kind of sacred frenzy. It's not just a gory tale. It's a warning wrapped in ritual, meant to show the consequences of resisting transformation, of mocking the divine, of refuse. Sing to let go. The most tragic part, one of the women is his own mother, Agave. You see her now, dancing in slow circles, her hair wild, her eyes soft with the glaze of ecstasy. She doesn't recognize her son. Not in this state. Not in this night. To her, he is a mountain lion. A beast. A threat to be conquered. She strikes the final blow, and you, still rooted to your spot, watch the scene close like a curtain dropping in slow motion. It is silent now. No flutes. No drums. Only breathing. Wind. A sigh among the leaves. Agave holds Pentheus' head high in the air, laughing with pride. She doesn't see the truth yet. Not until morning, and Dionysus, he's already walking away. He doesn't linger. Doesn't gloat. He's done what he came to do, and here's the scholarly debate of this section. Was this divine punishment, or divine theater? Some argue that Dionysus acts not as a cruel god, but as a mirror. He reflects the secret urges and contradictions of those around him, letting their own choices destroy or transform them. Others say, no, he was punishing hubris. That ancient favorite. The belief that mortals could mock the gods and walk away unscathed. You, for one, aren't sure. What you saw in those woods wasn't just a myth playing itself out. It was a lesson. In masks. In madness. In the strange, blurry border between belief and consequence, and perhaps, in its own way, it was merciful. Pentheus died the only way he could, stripped of power, illusion, and certainty. In the end, maybe Dionysus didn't destroy him. He just revealed him. As you turn to leave the clearing, a soft breeze nudges the branches aside, letting in a sliver of moonlight. The maenads, exhausted, begin to lie down in the grass. Some hum lullabies. One curls up beside a tree, whispering to her snake like it's an old friend. Agave stands still, a puzzled look creeping over her face, like she's waking from a vivid dream with the taste of honey and iron on her tongue. The forest breathes, you do too, and the story continues.
Dawn doesn't exactly arrive, it creeps. A faint light leaks into the woods, not golden or triumphant, but silvery and slow, like the world is gently exhaling after a long, strange dream. You're still there, barely blinking, the dew settling on your tunic and your thoughts moving like syrup. The maenads stir. One rolls over and stretches, her thyrsus falling softly beside her, like a misplaced bedtime toy. Another brushes leaves from her shoulders and yawns, the kind of yawn that comes after a really good nap, or a night you'll spend the rest of your life trying not to remember. And Agave? She's standing in the clearing, frozen, still holding her trophy. It takes her a long time to realize that something's wrong. That what she thought was a lion's head is not. The golden light catches on Pentheus's features just enough to ruin the illusion. You watch as the recognition creeps in, not suddenly, but in stages. Confusion, then doubt, then horror blooming across her face like bruises under the skin. She screams. But it's not a sharp, panicked scream. It's hollow, like the wind passing through a flute left too long in the rain. She drops the head, and the forest holds its breath. You want to look away, but you can't. Not because you enjoy this, not at all, but because you understand. This isn't punishment. It's revelation. The myth wasn't hiding gore for the sake of shock. It was painting grief in its rawest colors. Dionysus didn't need to strike Agave down. He only needed to let her remember. And that is, perhaps, worse. Now for your historical note. In Greek tragedies like the Bacchae, which tells this very story, Agave's realization is often considered the emotional climax. The moment where divine justice and human sorrow meet, awkwardly, in the middle of a forest that feels far too quiet. It's also one of the rare moments in ancient myth where a female character is given not just tragedy, but agency. Yes, she's a victim of Dionysus's plan, but she's also the one who delivers its most haunting truth. Her laughter, her joy, her fury, they were all real. And now, so is her grief. You follow her as she stumbles back toward Thebes, no longer the wild-eyed Maenad of the night before. Now she's just a mother. Wrinkled, barefoot, robe torn, voice shaking with something she can't quite name. She doesn't rush. She drifts, slowly, like sleepwalking through memory. The city gates open without resistance. No fanfare, no guards. Just silence. because word has already spread. They know. The king is dead. The god has won. But no one says it aloud. The people line the roads as Agave walks through, a woman transformed. She carries no weapon now, only the weight of what she's done. You trail behind her like a shadow with nothing left to offer. At the palace steps, she collapses. Her sister reaches out, and Agave flinches, then clutches her tight. No one speaks Dionysus's name. Not yet. But you feel him. Somewhere in the breeze, in the rustle of ivy climbing up marble columns that were bare yesterday, in the way a few townspeople glance toward the hills, as if expecting to hear flutes again at any moment. And you? You feel oddly empty. Not in a painful way. Just quiet. Like someone pressed pause on the world. Historians still argue whether Dionysus was intended as a warning or a comfort, whether his story teaches obedience to divine law, or offers a rare glimpse into the chaos that lies just beneath society's polished surface. One thing's certain, he doesn't leave places the same, especially not Thebes. Agave will live. That's the cruel mercy of it. She'll live and remember. She'll tell the story to anyone who will listen, and most won't believe her. Or worse, they will. The city won't honor Dionysus publicly, not for a while, but the rituals will continue, maybe in secret, maybe behind ivy-covered gates. And you? You step away, leave the palace behind, wander the quiet alleys, and notice, for the first time, how many doors have new carvings. Grapevines. Thirsty. Little symbols scratched low, where only those who know what to look for will see. You remember the stranger in linen, the wine in the fountain, the god in disguise. And then you smile. Because you realize Dionysus never really left. Back on the streets of Thebes, things settle, but never quite return to how they were. That's the thing about divine visitations. Even when they're over, they're not really over. The wine-stained soil remembers, the whispers echo, and the citizens, well, they try. Try to go back to routines, morning market, temple visits, household arguments about goat prices and olive oil taxes. But the veil has been lifted. People look at each other a little longer now. They ask quieter questions. They think twice before rolling their eyes at strange travelers in embroidered robes. You, meanwhile, have taken to strolling the city at dusk. It's easier then, softer. Less risk of running into someone reenacting tragic myth in the town square. The light is gentle, the air smells of fig smoke, and the vines, yes, still creeping, now curl deliberately around columns like they've always belonged there. One evening, near the foot of Cadmus's old statue, you notice a gathering. Small. Subtle. A ring of townsfolk, mostly women, a few older men, sitting cross-legged and murmuring verses to a slow rhythm. They're singing something you can't quite make out. Something older than Thebes. Older than the gods, maybe. And then someone begins to beat a drum, not loud but steady. Like a heartbeat rediscovered after too long a silence. You don't approach, you just listen. And it hits you. The rites aren't gone. They've gone underground. That's your mainstream historical fact for this section. Mystery cults. In actual Greek and Roman life, Dionysian worship wasn't all public parades and grape smashing. Much of it was conducted in secret, behind closed doors or in secluded forests. These were initiatory experiences, meant to offer connection to divinity, freedom from fear, and the seductive promise of transformation. And as for Thebes, the myth ends there, but the devotion doesn't. People begin holding small rituals in their homes. They share wine with a reverence it never had before. A sip becomes a sacrament. A toast becomes a prayer. Of course, there are those who scoff, who say it was all a fever dream, that the god was just a man with a flair for drama and some decent pyrotechnics. But those people avoid the woods now. They speak more softly near grapevines. And at least one prominent merchant's wife has started painting ivy patterns on her sandals. You stroll past the agora and catch sight of a theater being repaired. The one Dionysus once stood near. The one people laughed about when the stranger arrived. Now it's getting new seats. A polished stage, fresh scripts. Because theater too belongs to Dionysus, tragedy and comedy alike. You slip inside one evening and sit in the dark, watching a rehearsal. The actors move with confidence, their voices echoing in the stone. One recites lines from a new play, a woman mourning the son she didn't know she'd killed. You exhale, deeply. And here's your quirky tidbit. In ancient Thebes, the festivals for Dionysus were more understated than in Athens. But over time, even the most reluctant cities found space for him, through the arts, through the cult, through a curious cultural osmosis that made Dionysus less of an outsider and more of an invitation. And so you watch, you wander, you listen. Because Dionysus doesn't demand temples made of golas. Yes, he doesn't crave statues 20 cubits tall. He exists wherever people let go, of control, of shame, of the illusion that life must always be serious to be sacred. And you find that oddly comforting. The city is quieter now, but not dull. There's life pulsing beneath the marble. You feel it in the way people laugh a little louder, hug a little longer, dance occasionally without music. And late one night, as you pass a shuttered bakery, you see a cluster of figs arranged on the doorstep, fresh, soft, glistening. An offering. No one's around. But a breeze lifts your sleeve, and the faintest smell of myrrh follows. He's still here, not visible, but watching. Or maybe waiting. It's been a few weeks now, and the city of Thebes hums like a string drawn tight, not in tension, but in resonance. Something deep and invisible is still vibrating from the god's brief, barefoot visit. You notice it everywhere. A nod of gratitude at a spilled goblet of wine, a song hummed under breath while pruning ivy, a playwright scribbling in the corner of the agora like he's been struck by divine lightning, and the deadline is tomorrow. But it's not all praise and poetry. There's grumbling, too. Whispers from the older men who sit outside the gates and sip their watery beer with suspicion. Too much freedom, one mutters. Too many women talking too loudly, says another. And somewhere, inside the newly quiet palace, a different kind of silence holds court. Pentheus is gone, and Thebes must choose what story to tell about him. Hero, fool, victim. His mother, Agave, is no longer seen at the temples. She walks early before sunrise and speaks only to birds and breezes now. She's become something of a legend herself, a walking cautionary tale wrapped in mourning and memory. Meanwhile, you've started venturing back into the forest. Not deep, just to the edge, where the trees lean like old gossiping friends, and the earth still holds the shape of dance steps worn into it by barefoot joy. That's where you see it. A new gathering. Not wild, not frenzied, peaceful. A quiet group, some familiar faces, some new, gathered in a ring of moss and soft laughter. No thirsty this time, no snakes, just hands clasped, words whispered, and a single bowl of wine passed gently between them. You sit on the edge and listen. No one minds. Tonight's offering isn't celebration, it's memory. They speak of the god not as someone to be feared or worshipped blindly, but as a guest who came to wake something that had long been asleep. And maybe that's the truth of it. Dionysus didn't just arrive to punish or provoke. He came to remind. Now here's your mainstream historical fact. Some ancient writers believe Dionysus was a god of liminality, of thresholds and in-betweens. Not just of wine and chaos, but of all the blurry spaces where identity, order, and emotion shift. Masks, theater, altered states, sacred transformation, those all belong to him. He ruled not through laws, but through transitions. And Thebes? Thebes was the perfect threshold. It's a city stuck between past glory and present pride, between the rule of kings and the rise of chaos. Dionysus didn't tear it down. He pushed it forward, even if that forward meant falling down first. You think about Pentheus often, not in fear or anger, but with a sort of historical sympathy. He tried to control the uncontrollable. He dressed as what he feared to understand it, but understanding isn't the same as surrender. And that was his mistake. Historians still argue whether Pentheus was meant to be pitied or ridiculed. Was he the doomed mortal who couldn't adapt, or the tragic hero undone by curiosity and pride? Some say Euripides wrote him as a warning to tyrants, others as a reflection of the audience watching the play unfold. But one thing's agreed upon: Dionysus wins. Not with fire, not with blood, but with a mirror. He holds it up and lets people see themselves. You lie back in the moss and feel the ground cool beneath you. Someone is reciting a poem about grapes. Another hums a slow lullaby, the kind you might imagine drifting up through ancient olive trees on a night when the stars are too bright and nobody really wants to go home. The bowl of wine comes to you. You sip respectfully. It tastes like earth, sun, and the sort of sweetness that comes only after bitter memory. And in the breeze that rustles the leaves above, you think you hear a chuckle. Or maybe that's just the wine. Either way, you smile. Because the god is gone, but the god is never really gone. A new leader steps in, not with a fanfare, but with a furrowed brow and the cautious manner of someone very aware that the last guy got symbolically and literally shredded for misreading the room. The temples remain standing, but there's been a noticeable shift in attendance. The old order has grown quiet, reflective. The chorus of life, the murmurs in markets, the lazy slap of sandals in the dust, has slowed just a little. People still trade fish and figs. Children still chase goats down alleys. But there's a pause between conversations now. A moment of listening, of wondering whether that rustle behind the vines is just wind or something more. You spot Dionysus again. Sort of. He's not glowing or floating or standing atop a golden chariot pulled by panthers. He's walking the streets like he always did. No sandals, no guards, just that soft linen robe and a curl of ivy around his wrist, like a friendship bracelet from the divine. Only this time, no one stops him. No one challenges him. They part like water as he walks. And Dionysus? He doesn't shout, doesn't perform. He smiles, and with a tilt of the head, seems to be asking, "Have you learned how to listen yet?" This is where the phrase, "a crown of ivy and irony," finally makes sense. Because that's how he rules. Gently. With symbols. With nudges. No scepter, just a thyrsus that looks more like a party favor than a weapon. But somehow, it changes everything. Here's your historical fact. Dionysus is the only Olympian god born of a mortal woman. That strangeness shaped everything about him. He's half one world, half the other, neither fully mortal nor fully divine in the usual sense. That ambiguity is his superpower. He fits nowhere, so he fits everywhere. People start wearing ivy wreaths not just at festivals but during funerals. Theaters begin dedicating their first rehearsals to him, not out of obligation, but out of hope. Hope that something beautiful will bloom from chaos, that something profound can grow in the cracks. You walk past a wall where someone has painted a mural. It's abstract, just a swirl of vines, stars, and masks. But it stops you. Because tucked inside the mural is a small figure, eyes wide, arms open, half smiling. It's Pentheus. Not torn, not bleeding, just there. Watching. Perhaps forgiven. This brings us to tonight's fringe tidbit. Some scholars think Dionysus had a particular affinity for those who didn't belong. Women, foreigners, artists, people on the margins. To worship him wasn't just about drinking wine. It was about dissolving the walls that separate. About letting yourself be unmade, and then remade in a truer form. That's what Thebes is doing now. Being unmade and remade. Theaters reopen. New plays premiere, not tragedies this time, but comedies with a slightly bittersweet edge. People laugh and cry and laugh again, because that's the rhythm Dionysus prefers. Laughter wrapped around loss, music dancing with silence. And you? You find yourself invited to more gatherings than usual. Some are just dinners, some are borderline cultic, others are spontaneous grape-stomping parties where someone inevitably ends up quoting poetry with purple feet. At one such gathering, a girl with braids and a voice like wind through reeds hands you a cup of wine and says, "To masks, mirrors, and memories." You drink. It tastes like the forest, like mystery, like something you almost remember from a dream. And you realize Dionysus didn't come to destroy Thebes. He came to teach it how to live. You find yourself drawn again and again to that edge of the forest. Not for the spectacle, not anymore, but for the quiet after, the hush that follows understanding. The woods aren't wild now. They breathe. The trees seem to nod in welcome, as if acknowledging that you've seen enough to walk among them with respect. And still, Thebes stirs behind you, slowly, curiously. There's talk of rebuilding, temples, roads, the very structure of belief. But nothing quite fits the old mold anymore. The people have tasted something outside the boundaries. They can't untaste it. And Dionysus? Well, he's still around. Sometimes as a laugh in the breeze, sometimes as the sudden blooming of grapevines along a neglected fence. And sometimes, if you're paying attention, as a barefoot figure standing at the top of the amphitheater just before dusk, his silhouette framed by the setting sun, arms crossed, head tilted, watching a rehearsal that's gone a little off script. There's no thunder, no lightning bolts, just the faint sound of flutes echoing through a place that used to be stone and law, and is now, somehow, alive. Tonight, Thebes is not mourning. Tonight, they're performing. You sit in the half-full theater and watch a new play unfold. It's not tragic, not really. It's the story of a city that lost a king and found a god, or maybe found themselves. The chorus sings softly. There are no heroes, only people learning how to dance through uncertainty. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this section. The theater of Dionysus in Athens became the cradle of Western drama, with entire festivals devoted to both tragedy and comedy. These weren't just entertainments, they were rituals, a collective exhale, a societal mirror, and yes, often a safe space to explore danger, grief, and absurdity from the comfort of a stone bench. Which is exactly what Thebes is doing now. This is tea, he Dionysian gift. Not control, but catharsis. Not answers, but release. Someone hands you a mask, half smile, half tear, and you trace its edges with your thumb. You don't wear it, but you keep it in your lap, just in case the play needs an understudy. And here comes your quirky tidbit. In some local variants of the myth, Dionysus resurrects Pentheus, recasts him as a companion, a figure who eventually learns the wisdom of surrender. Not all stories end in ruin. Some myths are rewritten with time, softened at the edges by memory and mercy. And you wonder, is that possible here? Can a city, or a soul, undo the undoing? You look around the amphitheater. Some people are crying, others are laughing. One man is sleeping, quite peacefully, on his friend's shoulder. That's the true Dionysian rite, isn't it? Not chaos for its own sake, but the kind that clears a path, breaks the walls, lets something truer shine through. The play ends with a toast. The actors raise their cups, not grand goblets, just humble bowls. And the chorus sings one last line, to joy and the madness that makes joy necessary. The crowd doesn't erupt. They just nod. You nod too. As you exit the theater, someone presses a fig into your hand. You bite into it absent-mindedly, and it tastes like dusk and memory. Sweet. A little bitter. Unmistakably alive. You glance back. The stage is empty, but the ivy is creeping up the marble steps. A few days later, you find yourself at the edge of a vineyard just outside Thebes. It wasn't here before. Not exactly, but the soil was always right. And now, where weeds once sulked, grapevines stretch and coil like they've been waiting for this invitation. Farmers you remember as stoic and sun-wrinkled are humming softly as they prune the vines, speaking to them like old friends who finally decided to visit. You trail your hand along a row of ripening grapes, deep purple and glowing in the morning light. The air is rich, heady with promise and sugar, and maybe just a hint of myth. Someone offers you a cup. It's still early, but you accept it. This is not a land that waits for permission anymore. You sip. It's young wine, bright, slightly chaotic. Not polished, but somehow perfect. A few others sit in the grass with you. Farmers, shepherds, a poet who smells of thyme and ink. Someone plays a reed pipe, and another begins softly reciting a hymn to Dionysus. Not the booming kind shouted from temple steps, but a quiet little rhyme about laughter and leaves and not spilling your wine on sacred goats. And that's the heart of it, isn't it? Dionysus isn't just the god of drunken revelry, as some lazy scrolls like to suggest. He's the god of transformation, yes, but also of transition, from sleep to waking, silence to song, grief to release. And here's your scholarly debate of the day. Some argue that Dionysus represents a bridge, not just between human and divine, but between opposing states of being. Life and death, sanity and madness, structure and spontaneity. His rites allowed people to move between those states safely, at least most of the time. Others say he is the divine embodiment of contradiction itself, neither here nor there. Not meant to be understood, only experienced. You glance around, no temples in sight, just sunlight, grapes, people laughing, gently, hands stained with juice and joy. It makes sense that Dionysus would linger here. Not as a king, not even as a god exactly, but as an energy, a question that never quite resolves. And it's not just Thebes anymore. The story of what happened here, of the king who wore a dress and forgot his fear, of the mother who danced too far and remembered too late, of the god who came to remind a city how to feel, has begun to spread. Travelers pick it up like breadcrumbs. Merchants swap versions over baked fish and rough bread. One version says the Maenads flew. Another insists Dionysus turned the palace to wine. Most agree the king had it coming. And so, the myth evolves. That's another Dionysian gift. Nothing stays static. A myth, like a vine, grows wild if you let it. Now for your quirky historical note, in later Roman tradition, Dionysus became Bacchus, a more polished, Latin-flavored version who kept the grapes but added a little bureaucratic flair. Bacchic cults popped up across the empire, and at one point, they grew so popular that Roman officials tried to ban them for being a little too enthusiastic about ecstatic liberation and suspicious nighttime gatherings. Did it work? Of course not. You can't unring a sacred tambourine. Even centuries later, the rites would echo in art, in song, in half-remembered holidays with oddly loose morals. You lie back in the grass. The reed pipe plays slower now. Someone nearby starts sketching vines in the dirt, and for a moment you feel it again, that soft pulse in the earth, that barely there vibration that says, yes, this, keep going. Because while Thebes may try to build new laws, and the world may try to put masks back on, Dionysus has already rewritten the script. And the wine, it's still flowing. You leave the vineyard behind the way you might leave a dream, reluctantly, blinking in the sunlight, unsure if you're still wearing the smile it gave you. Thebes stretches out before you again. A city changed not by war, but by story. Not by gods thundering down from the sky, but by one soft-footed deity who walked through its heart and rearranged its soul. But Dionysus doesn't stop here. He never does. His stories are like seeds blown by the wind, landing in new places, sprouting where you least expect. So you go where the wind points. South. Across the rocky hills of Greece, into port towns buzzing with gossip and salted air, onto a ship with patched sails and a crew that insists dolphins follow them more often than is strictly normal. You sail to Italy, where people speak Latin and eat too much bread, and somehow, still know all the words to that hymn you heard in the woods. This is Rome, and Bacchus is waiting. He doesn't look much different. The robe is more tailored, the cup is silver instead of clay. But the twinkle in the eye, the slow, knowing smile, the faint scent of grapes, roses, and mischief, unmistakable. You follow the crowd down narrow alleys and across hidden courtyards. The bacchanalia are whispered about in Rome, nervously, reverently, sometimes both. Not just wine parties, no. They're rituals, dances, celebrations of life as it could be, unfiltered and free. and they're spreading fast. Here's your historical fact. The Bacchanalia, as Roman adaptations of Dionysian rites, were initially small and exclusive, but as participation grew, they became so widespread and ecstatic that the Roman Senate tried to suppress them around 186 BCE, fearing they undermined social order. Too many women, too many secrets, too many truths. In other words, too much Dionysus. You find yourself at one of these gatherings, called, of course, a supper, but supper in this context means soft drums, slow singing, and wine that tastes older than your ancestors. There are no sermons, no grand speeches, just stories. One woman shares how she met the god during a fever. Another swears he once appeared in the steam rising from her bath. A man in the corner quietly strings a lyre and sings of vines growing from the marble of forgotten cities. And then they ask you to speak. You hesitate. What do you say after all you've seen? You tell them about Thebes, about the stranger who wasn't quite a stranger, about Pentheus and his beautiful, terrible lesson, about the forest and the dance and the silence that came after. They listen, not just with ears, but with breath and body and bone. And when you finish, they don't clap, they toast. To forgetting, says one. To remembering, says another. And everyone drinks. Now for tonight's fringe tidbit. Archaeological evidence shows Dionysian imagery across the Roman world, on mosaics, sarcophagi, drinking vessels, and even tombs. He wasn't just a god of the living. He escorted souls into the afterlife, making him a bridge not only between joy and madness, but life and death. That's why the Romans didn't fully abandon him, even when the Senate panicked. He offered too much. Ecstasy, yes, but also comfort. The promise that letting go was not the same as losing control. That surrender could be sacred. The gathering ends slowly. No rush. People leave in twos and threes, with lazy waves and whispered jokes. Someone leaves you a fig. Another leaves a flower. And one person, old enough to remember the world before the god came, touches your shoulder and says, "He finds us all eventually." You step outside. The moon is high, but the world feels low and gentle. Like it's resting. Like it's waiting. And you know, wherever Dionysus travels next, he won't arrive with lightning. He'll arrive with laughter. You wander through Rome now with a sort of trained awareness, not of noise, but of rhythms. The subtle shift in the marketplace when someone begins humming an old Bacchic tune. The way ivy climbs not just garden walls, but government buildings. Even the sculptures, so serious, so stern, seem just a little more relaxed these days. Dionysus, or Bacchus, depending on whom you're asking, has left his fingerprints on everything. And unlike most gods, he doesn't demand temples or sacrifices that clang with fear. His altars are laughter, music, movement, a conversation that starts with gossip and ends in revelation, a dance you didn't mean to join, but somehow did. And Rome, despite its marble and politics and war machines, is beginning to sway. You visit a villa on the Palatine Hill, where a mosaic depicts a parade of satyrs and maenads, all mid-dance, grinning wildly. At the center, a figure lounging with a cup, looking just like the man you once followed into the forest. The host of the villa sees you staring and offers you a drink. You recognize him, he says, not as a question. You nod. And here's your mainstream historical moment. Even at the height of Rome's rigid order, Dionysus, Bacchus, remained one of the most beloved gods of the people. His festivals became outlets not only for indulgence but for emotion. They were pressure valves for a culture that prized control. In Bacchus's rites, Romans could scream, cry, laugh, and be someone else for a night, then return to duty, lighter. Back in the streets, you begin to notice how the myth of Dionysus morphs with each retelling. In Thebes, he was a son returning to claim his honor. In Athens, a patron of the arts and sweet-tongued catharsis. In Rome, a liberator, of class, of custom, of gender, of grief. One evening, you attend a festival where the line between stage and audience disappears completely. Actors wear SKS, yes, but so do the viewers. You sit beside a senator with goat horns on his head and a housemaid in golden sandals. No one cares. Everyone laughs. And someone shouts cheerfully, "To madness!" The crowd answers, "To meaning." That's your quirky tidbit. In some versions of Bacchic ritual, participants believed the madness they entered wasn't insanity, but insight. A brief window where mortal minds touched divine truth, not in clarity, but in surrender. They didn't seek to understand the gods. They sought to feel them. Later, alone under a fig tree near the Tiber, you watch fireflies blink like stars trying to decide if they belong to the sky or the earth. You wonder, what would have happened if Pentheus had leaned in? If he'd danced instead of spied? Would the city have learned earlier? Would the myth have ended with laughter instead of silence? Historians still debate what Dionysus truly represents. Some call him a symbol of chaos barely contained. Others, the divine within the irrational. But almost all agree on one thing: his stories never end where they begin. He arrives as a stranger, leaves as a god, and changes everyone in between. You lie back in the grass and let yourself remember. The flicker of torches through olive trees. The sound of bare feet on forest floor. The way even silence seemed to sway with rhythm. And you realize, you are not who you were when this journey began. You've danced. You've mourned. You've watched a god slip through cities like smoke through fingers. And now you understand what he really offered. Not just wine or ecstasy or escape, but freedom. You wake up one morning with a faint ache behind your eyes and a familiar fragrance in the air. Grapes, rosemary, and distant drums. It's quiet, but not too quiet. More like the hush of a stage before the curtain rises. You've left Rome behind. Traveled again. This time not in search of Dionysus, but in his shadow. You're following the echo now, the ripples he leaves in his wake. And today, they've led you to a tiny island in the Aegean, Naxos. Just the name tastes like salt and myth. Here, they say, Dionysus fell in love. That's right. He wasn't just a god of parties and transformations. He was also a god of heartbreak, of recovery, of second chances under a full moon. And this is where it happened, where Ariadne, abandoned by Theseus after helping him escape the labyrinth, yes, that Theseus, was found asleep on the shore. Dionysus, passing by on one of his many adventures, saw her. And unlike Theseus, he stayed. Now for your mainstream historical moment. The story of Ariadne and Dionysus was popular in both Greek and Roman traditions, symbolizing divine redemption after betrayal. Their marriage was often depicted in art, he with his ivy and she with a crown of stars. You walk the rocky path that winds up toward an old temple ruin. Wind tugs at your robe. The sun paints the stones gold. You sit near the crumbled columns and try to imagine what it looked like in its prime. Music echoing through the halls, garlands of vine leaves woven into pillars, a chorus of believers singing in time with the sea. And there, in your mind, he appears again. Dionysus. Not as a tempest, not even as a teacher, just as someone who knows how it feels to be misunderstood, to be dismissed, to be born into contradiction and crowned with questions. Ariadne wasn't rescued. She was chosen. She was seen. And that's what Dionysus does best. He sees the overlooked, the misfits, the joyful, the furious, the dancers on the edge of madness who never quite fit into the order of things. That's your fringe tidbit for this section. In some variations of the myth, Dionysus doesn't just love Ariadne, he immortalizes her. Her crown becomes a constellation. She ascends with him. Not a mortal rewarded with luxury, but a soul recognized as divine. You wander down to the shore. The waves brush the sand like fingertips on a drumskin. Someone has left a small amphora half buried in the rocks. Inside, fresh grapes, a fig, and a sprig of thyme. An offering. No one's around. No one needs to be. That's the thing with Dionysus now. He's everywhere. And not in the way statues are everywhere, rigid, immovable, but in the way scent clings to linen, in the way a tune lingers after the music stops. You pass through a tiny village, and a child runs past wearing a mask made of leaves. You hear a flute in the distance, though you see no musician. You spot a goat perched in a tree, chewing contentedly, and Well, that one might not be divine, but it's certainly Dionysian in spirit. Historians still try to separate the myth from the movement, the symbol from the god. Was Dionysus just a metaphor? A vessel for human desire? A story told too many times around too many campfires? Maybe. Or maybe he was and is a reminder that we are not built only for reason and rigidity, that chaos has its wisdom, that dancing is sometimes a form of prayer. You sit on a flat stone, the sea stretching endlessly before you. The wine-dark waves sparkle. A breeze lifts your hair, and you close your eyes, not to escape, but to listen. Because sometimes the god speaks not in thunder or dreams, but in stillness. Night falls slowly on the island. You're lying on a hill dotted with thyme and moonflowers, and the stars above look like they've been hand-stitched into the sky. The breeze is warm, not sleepy, but calm. Like even the wind has somewhere to be but isn't in a hurry to get there. In the distance, the soft thrum of a drum begins. Faint, familiar. It isn't celebration this time. It's rhythm for rhythm's sake, a heartbeat for the dark. You've traveled far, from Thebes to Rome, from forest paths to coastal cliffs, and every step of the way, Dionysus has been there. Not always visible, rarely announced, but always present. A whisper at the edge of transformation. And now, at the end of it all, you finally understand. He's not the god of chaos. He's the god of what happens after. After the walls fall, after the masks slip, after the wine overflows and the truth dances out of your mouth before your brain can catch it. And in that way, he's deeply comforting, because Dionysus doesn't demand perfection. He offers permission to grieve, to rejoice, to forget, to remember. You walk down from the hill into a grove bathed in moonlight. There's a small fire, crackling low. Around it sit a few travelers like yourself. One strums a lyre, barely pressing the strings. Another is painting wine onto canvas with a branch. No one speaks, and yet you feel deeply spoken to. Here's your final historical reflection. In late antiquity, as new religions rose and old gods faded from formal worship, Dionysus didn't disappear. He changed. Rebranded, reappeared in mystery plays, rural festivals, harvest rituals. Some say he became an idea instead of a name, a pulse in the human experience that couldn't be untangled, only translated. And so he remained. You sit with the others, letting the warmth of the fire soak into your hands. Someone passes you a fig, someone else a small cup of honeyed wine. No one says cheers, no one has to, because you know where you are, and who you are, and what it means to feel fully alive under a sky that remembers every myth ever whispered. The flames flicker. The lyre hushes. And slowly, gently, the grove begins to dim. Wind down. Final 300 words. The fire crackles softer now, like it knows your eyes are heavy. The lyre has quieted. Only the crickets sing now, their tiny voices stitching a lullaby into the dark. You shift slightly, nestling into the earth, into the hush, into the long exhale that this journey has become. The night folds in around you like a heavy wool cloak. The stars blur a little, and you stop trying to focus on them. They'll be there tomorrow. All the loudness of the day, the gods, the chants, the dancing feet, the broken kings, slips away like sand through your fingers. In its place, stillness. Not the kind that demands anything of you, just the kind that says, "You're here, that's enough." You breathe in, lavender, salt air, maybe a little wine on someone's breath nearby, and you exhale, long, slow, like letting go of a thought you don't need to finish. A leaf brushes against your cheek. Not a hand, not a sign, just nature doing what it does. And you let it. Somewhere far away, a drum taps one last time. Then silence. Your limbs feel soft, your thoughts unknit. You are not alone. You are not watched. You are simply here, carried on the breath of a god who never asked for worship, only wonder. And now, the fire fades, the stars blur, the vines curl gently around your dreams, and you sleep.